Well, thank you everybody for coming to my new initiative. My name is Laura Rincón, and I'm doing my master's in museum studies. I will begin my second year, and during this quarantine, I just spend my time reading about collections, and I got this idea about to have a collections lead club because like there is many meaningful and powerful literature about collections, and I'm new in the field. I am a librarian, so I'm new in the field and I want to learn more, and I would like to see how I can improve this field. So it is great to have this space to discuss and to get some advice from people who has been in the field, people who is new in the field like me. So yeah, thank you for being here. So I would like to do a check-in. You want to say your name, where are you working, and why did you decide to join this club? So we're gonna start. And our co-host, John Simmons.
Okay, I'll start. Hi, my name's John Simmons. I am a independent museum consultant based in Pennsylvania, and formerly I was at the University of Kansas as a collections manager in the Natural History Museum. And I decided to join because Laura invited me to. I know Laura from Columbia.
Okay, I'll go next. I'm Ilana Venemy. I'm at the Academy of Natural Sciences of Drexel University for almost 40 years now. And I've worked in a number of collections. My academic training is in invertebrate paleontology and museum studies, but I've worked in malacology, entomology, I've been in the botany department now for the last 13 or 14 years.
Thank you, Elena. Christine, okay.
Hello, I'm Christine Mazzallo. I am the former assistant collections manager from the La Brea Tar Pits, and I just received my master's in museum studies from Johns Hopkins. I'm currently not working in a museum because there's no jobs available, and this just sounded really interesting, so I thought I'd check it out. So nice to meet everyone.
Nice to meet you.
Christine, nice to meet
I
you.
go next. I'm Julianne Snyder. I'm the managing director of the Earth and Mineral Sciences Museum and Art Gallery at Penn State. I've been in the museum biz for on and off for many, many years. My background is actually in fine arts, but I've always worked in science. And the Earth and Mineral Sciences Museum and Art Gallery is a combination of science, art, and technology that's of the extractive industries. But you're never too old to learn, and we're undergoing a complete renovation of our galleries. And this thought to be a perfect time to see what's going on in the rest of the museum world.
Hi, my name is Nicole, and I'm a master's student at the University of South Florida. I'm interested in this club because I'm working as a collections manager at the university with a 10-year collection of mollusks. And I'm interested in getting a job here, hopefully, one day, without the pandemic.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Young. I'm used to going last with the alphabet that I have inherited. Christine, don't worry about not having a job and working in a museum. All of us that are working in museums aren't working in the museums these days.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm director of the University of Wisconsin Insect Research Collection. And I saw the announcement and thought it might be interesting. And we also have a consortium of museums on campus, and my colleague in zoology teaches a museum studies course, which involves most of the museums on campus. So I figured it might be a good way to feed into her course as well. So we'll see how this goes.
How many museums are in your consortium?
5.
5.
We have entomology, zoology, botany, geology, and anthropology. We're all disparate university museums, though we don't have a single collection, a single museum like most of you probably have.
We don't. No, we have, Penn State's got, on this campus, on University Park campus, we have 20 different museums and galleries. And we're in several different colleges. Some are departmental museums. There's only one standalone museum, it's the art gallery, or the art museum, Palmer Art Museum. But we've
Pretty
got
similar here.
As well, just to have some, talk to other museum people, really.
Including an entomology museum.
Entomology, Frost Entomology Museum.
Yep.
It's a great museum. They got all new cabinetry recently.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much. And for today, I would like to discuss about the manifesto for active history museum collections. I really like this manifesto because it has very powerful points about collections, and like I would like to understand more like the process of a collection when it doesn't support the mission, because in this manifesto it's very interesting how we create this relation with the objects and how we manage this. But what is the like the top? What is the point? Yeah, like for example, or role as managers or role as professionals in a collection. Yeah, so maybe I would like to understand more about like the process of the professionals in working with collections.
I guess I could start out by commenting that having spent my entire career working with natural history materials, this manifesto, I think, is appropriate for an objects collection, for a history collection. But I think that in a natural history museum, you have a somewhat different approach to your specimens and their uses. And I didn't find this manifesto completely relevant for a natural history collection.
Yeah, it is written for from the point of view of history museums, and I did notice that they use the word artifact rather than object in the manifesto, which shows they are thinking about historical objects, historical artifacts. And yeah, I think there's some things, though, even natural history museums can take away from this. And this is that we've had this tendency, I think, to accumulate very large collections, and that doesn't necessarily mean those objects are being well used. And it may be that in the case of natural history, which of course, if you look at the statistics, natural history collections are the smallest group of collections in the US, and they have most of the objects. And they also have the smallest number of staff. So we're used to taking care of huge numbers of things. When I was at Kansas, I was in the herpetology collection, so just amphibians and reptiles was 300,000 specimens. But even among natural history, we do have things that we keep kind of because they've always been there, things that do not have appropriate data or maybe are dubious, but we also want to be very careful because we keep deep collections. Our repeated collections over time add great value to what we have. And so, yeah, in that sense, I think the manifesto is not as relevant to natural history as it is to other areas. But we all have the problem of large collections accumulating without compensatory increases in budget and staff. And so we all have this problem, and we will have into the future on how are we going to properly take care of these collections and make them available for use. I had an experience 3 years ago. I was on a group that was brought into Smithsonian to look at the situation they had with the collections, just those on site in Washington, D.C. So we did not consider the collections out at Switland, Maryland in their sorting center, just the collections that they kept on their main campus in natural history. And it was obvious going through and talking to the collection staff and looking over the place, they can barely manage to keep up with the influx of new specimens. And they are not able, physically do not have the money or the staff to really properly take care of the collections, and they are not really handling the usage rate either. They're constantly behind on reprocessing loan material, returning, and things like that. So this is something we all have to look at and ask ourselves some tough questions about. Is it really appropriate to keep accumulating extremely large collections like that?
Just grateful I work with insects.
Yeah, so you have millions to our hundreds of thousands.
Yes, we have about 3 million curated, and heaven knows how many that are in bulk. Before you guys came on, I was sorting one jar from 1 week from one trap, and it probably had about 7,000 specimens in it. And I think I work mostly on beetles. I think I picked out about 20 of those and cleaned up the rest and put them back in the jar, and they're all coated and they'll be bulked with everything else for whatever. Yeah, but things that don't have good data, you have to make a call on historical significance, like you were saying, John. But because we are a teaching institution like Penn State and some of the others of you, a lot of those get routed down to our teaching collection because there's constant need for new material there with students going through things. I guess probably, a brontosaurus bone could hold up to students looking at it better than a small fly, which has a shelf life of about 2 hours.
I don't know. We had our brontosaurus bone. We actually have one, and I was trying to explain to one of my fellow staff members. He was at the university at the time. How this is, it is not just rock. It's a fragile object. He said, well, it's just rock. And he grabbed the cancellous end of it and chunked it off, and it fell into thousands of pieces. And he just kind of disappeared. It's like, no. But I think it was Tim Robinson. But I think on the manifesto, the thing that jumps out at me is it has to advance the mission of the whatever you're collecting, what your collection is, how are you using it, has to advance the mission of your museum. And I know for us, because we have a very limited staff and limited space and very limited budget, we have to be really careful because people have kept rock collections they want to give to us. It's like, we can't take that. For one, we don't need them. For two, they're not well provenienced. And for three, even if we took them, we couldn't in good conscience keep them in the way they should be. So, and they may not advance the mission of our collection, which is, of course, education and looking at the history of our college in particular. But so I think it comes down to, what is your mission? Is it a good mission statement? And are the collections helping you can keep that mission alive?
For example, in this manifesto, the authors talk about this sessioning. So I would like to know why with collections it's very hard to do this sessioning.
Well, deaccessioning is something that's always gone on in museums. Not always as a form, in the history of museums, not always as a formal practice like we do now. But this is one thing, and it depends on what you're doing with deaccessioning. If you're taking objects that have a high market value and deaccessioning them solely so you can gain the profits back, that's one issue. On the other hand, if your deaccessioning means you are sending objects to another institution where they can be better used, that's quite different. Or if you're trading them or whatever. But deaccessioning tends to be controversial, not so much in what you're deaccessioning, but how you use the funds that you gain. And legally, a museum in most places can take collections that it's in charge of and deaccession them and sell them without a problem. The problem is an ethical one, because the American Alliance of Museums and other professional institutions have certain restrictions, and usually that involves how you use those funds. They can only be used to acquire more objects for the collections or to take direct care of the collections. And that's really where the problems come in. You run into this far more in art museums and history museums, where an extremely marketable object is deaccessioned, such as a painting or an object that has great monetary value. And that's really when it gets controversial. But deaccessioning itself, I think, is an old established practice, and most museums probably do a very good job with it. But if you have a malacological collection is a good example, because we're short malacologists. If you have a collection of shells in your collection and you do not have a curator who works on them, should that museum keep those, or should they try to find a better home for those, someone where a curator is working who could use those in research, so that they could be made more easily available to the scientific community and used in public outreach? So I think there are some questions like that we can ask.
For example, the second point in the manifesto about initiate the smarter sharing, for me is very interesting. Like, would be great to see the interlibrarian loans within museums in your region. So,
yeah, to some degree that happens, but of course that costs money, because people have to prepare the objects for shipment and process them. But in natural history museums are particularly far more inclined to loan objects, because they can loan objects for far less money. Than it's far less expensive to ship natural history specimens than art. So that happens a lot more, I think, in natural history than other fields, but you do see some of that. But I think museums do, in general, have a tendency to keep everything that's ever been in the collection without a lot of thought as to how this is going to impact the mission later on. And we do wind up with large numbers of things in collections that are never looked at, or rarely looked at. And the hard part is determining, is it really something that should be sent to another institution, or something that should be gotten rid of? Or is it something that will be useful in the future?
Yeah. Yeah.
I was going to say, I used to get the question when I did museum tours, what's the most valuable specimen in your collection? And the way I usually answered that is, well, it's the one we just got that no one's looked at yet, because that specimen might be really important to, developing new theories in science, whatever. But, the older collections, just because they're old does not mean they do not have value. But it's a case of, are people really going to look at them? You were going to say, Alana?
Well, in the decades, scores of years now that I've been at the Academy, it has happened more times than I can count that we get a new president and they do a new planning exercise. They rewrite the mission statement. So we don't know. It's hard to look at our collections now and know what will be relevant in the next iteration of mission statement and long range plan. And you'd hate to say, well, we haven't had a mammalogy curator in 80 years. Maybe we should get rid of the mammal collection. And then somehow the next person to come down the pipe would say, oh, our focus is moving forward is going to be on terrestrial ecosystems, and all the mammals are gone.
It's not only that, but also I'm afraid that a lot of us, because we are strapped for personnel and resources, have to follow funding trails. Our two most recent NSF grants, one is on terrestrial parasites and another one is on moths. And I work on beetles and my curator works on bees and wasps. So here we are on grants that neither of us are specialists on, but that's where we could get the money to get some things done. And of course, the other thing is most of that money actually these days goes to digitizing which actually goes to paying undergrad digitizers and doesn't even train graduate students. So yeah, what do? You kind of have to suck it up and follow the money, I guess.
Yeah, but that, of course, is an instance of, even though that's not your specialty, you are using those collections.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
and you're making them more broadly available.
Broader audience. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
Even if they are moths.
Well, things like in Elena's museum, I know they have mastodon material from Jefferson. And that they may not have a mastodon specialist, but you would never give up Thomas Jefferson's mastodon material if you had it in your collection. So where do you draw that line?
I think what you need to do is look at collection impacts and how much of your resources are expended taking care of certain kinds of collections. If you discover that you have large amounts of material that no one is looking at, that are possibly even no one's aware of because you've had them for years and you've never had a specialist in that area, and they're taking up a lot of space and take a lot of resources to maintain, people checking on them and making sure that you're engaging in pest control and keeping the environment. That means all of those resources going to that collection are not going to things that could be more usable to you. And in that case, maybe it's time to consider sending them to some other place. And I would make a strong argument for, when deaccessioning, your first concern should be trying to keep collections in the public trust, in another nonprofit institution, before they would go out to the general public. But we've all have limited resources. There's only so much that we can take in and take care of. And at some point, you are going to harm your mission if you just keep accumulating things that you don't use, or if you keep things around. So for instance, Alana might not want to get rid of her Jefferson mastodon bits. I would hope you wouldn't, at least. But might be other things other large fossils, for example, because those do take up a lot of resources, that would be better off in another institution. And this is the Smithsonian problem. They have a lot of very large, very nice specimens, but if they can't make them available readily and can't take good care of them, should they still be there, or should we be looking at farming those out to other institutions?
Which they've actually even done already.
They have done some. I remember a number of years ago, they sent their, what was the beetles that went to Nebraska? Was that?
Scarabs.
Yeah, scarab beetles, but that's a program that takes money to get set up. I think it's a great idea, but it didn't really impact largely in the collection. I don't think it was it was a great idea, but I don't think it was put into the kind of practice it should have been. The problem at the Smithsonian is it is literally easier for them to get money for a new museum or a new building than it is to get money for a new employee. Mm-hmm. And that is an absurdity, but that is the reality that they deal with, being a government institution, federal government institution. So they're kind of limited to the number of collections care people they can bring in. If they could bring in more people, they could probably do more with the resources and space they have, but they can't do that. So what about Christine and Nicole? What do you guys think?
So I actually think that's an interesting problem. The collections that I work with are organized very differently than a traditional natural history collection. So I'm actually doing research on it, and we're just looking at gastropods from Florida's West Shelf. And so it's hard to think that we would run into those similar issues with space and having to get rid of things. Granted, I'm the one organizing everything, going, why are we on another cruise getting more material? This is too much.
So how are they organized? You say differently.
Yeah, so we organize it geographically, rather than, it's geographic first, then taxonomic, then taphonomic. And so instead of having, say, your fighting conch, Stromus alatus, in a single section, it would be on every shelf where the georeference tag says it should be on the shelf. So my concept of the way that we acquire things is very different, and is very interesting. I was trying to think about how to implement that into the conversation, but it's like apples and oranges at this point.
Well, it's still your limited resources, and you know your collection arrangement ought to be a reflection of how the collection is used, or an arrangement that makes it most available for use. You shouldn't be arrange things just because some other museum arranges them that way. You know, it's.
This is true. This is true. But so I feel like it allows you to do different types of research.
Yeah.
So rather than saying, I would like to study this single species, I can say, well, here's the diversity of a shelf. You now have access to any geographic spot if you so desire. So it can answer different questions. And I'm wondering if museums adopted additional ways to organize, if perhaps that would help accomplish or satisfy any of these problems that are currently going on. So if we're sending materials around because we don't want to hold on to it, what if we started aggregating based on geography? I don't know if that would work.
That's a really interesting idea. There are lots of ways to arrange collections, and not all collections have been arranged the same way. And yeah, we do get fixated on arranging things based on our system of scientific nomenclature. I am frequently told by curators when I look at their collections, oh, we have things arranged phylogenetically, in which case I always ask to see the branching sequence of shelving. Because of course it's not, it's linear. So they're really just doing an Aristotle number on you and calling it phylogenetic. What they mean is they put things in some order that makes sense to them, phylogenetic.
Right. Organized chaos.
Yeah, but that's true. There maybe in some cases there are better ways to arrange things and make better use of space, because I have seen instances where space was very poorly used. I used to be on the board of a local history museum, and for some reason 20 years ago the director decided the proper way to arrange things on the shelf was by using the Chenal system, which is now the nomenclature 4.0, that system for arranging things, which is an arrangement for artifacts, for human-made objects based on original intended use, which meant he had great big things next to really small things, and it was the worst use of space I have ever seen. And the museum was complaining that they were out of storage space. Well, of course they were, because they used the space about as badly as you could by insisting on this arrangement following this conceptual idea of the objects, rather than let's put all the wooden stuff together because it needs a certain relative humidity, and all the metal stuff together, or put things together by size. They insisted on going through this taxonomic arrangement. So,
for example, the last semester I began my project in the theology collection, and we are working in change the organization from taxonomical classification to jar size.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited about it because the collection will be more accessible, not just for professionals, also to people as me that I don't have any idea about fishes. Yeah. And yeah, they have tons of problems trying to looking for a species. They can spend like 1-2 hours looking for one species. So yeah, so I'm really excited about.
Yeah, they're getting some pushback in the field over that, because the traditional arrangement is different. But that is a very effective way to arrange things, and it means you don't have to move things all the time. You know, we should be using our database as a locator rather than going in and just reading labels. Christine, you said you used to be at La Brea?
Yeah, I was at, I still considered a special projects volunteer.
So you're home, I was gonna say, that's the home of hundreds of direwolf skulls.
Oh yeah.
Oh, do you need them all?
Yes, of course. They're all different. Yeah, the way that everything is organized at the tar pits is a little bit different too, because it's all site specific. Everything is excavated on site. And there's microfossils versus these massive bones. I did a poster for the Spinach Conference on one of the new projects that they've pulled me in on. And it's just for the microfossils and trying to figure out how to better curate everything, make everything more accessible. So rather than, okay, I need to see one rodent femur, here's a whole drawer of rodent femora, and the researcher can just kind of go through everything. But prior to quarantine, they were trying to figure out a better way to store everything. So we're hoping that this microfossil project will bring some insight on how to better store everything and what to get to store everything. Nothing gets sold, everything is on site still everywhere, or it gets loaned out to other institutions, but mostly everything is there. So yeah, so it organized chaos everywhere.
Yeah, we arrange ours a little differently than normal too, I would think, because one, our collections are diverse. We've got art, technology, and typical geology collections, but our space is such that we have one room we have climate control in, and the other spaces we have are controlled by the building's HVAC systems, and there's two different systems, so depending on which side of the building you're on, you'll have completely different HVAC setups in two rooms that we don't have control over. So the only one we have control over, we've made the decision to make it where everything that has the most climate control needs go. But even within that, we have to come up with a general system that is pretty good for everything, not great for anything. So in that room, we've got our fine arts, lots of paintings, lots of works on paper. There's also a large number of the fossils. In fact, I think all the fossils are in there. A large number of the rocks and minerals that have climate control issues like pyrites and halites and a number of other things. So they're in a controlled environment. In the next room over are things like quartz. Who cares? I mean, quartz don't really care what the temperature and humidity is. But it's not a Dana system for the rocks and minerals. It's not, all things are mixed together because that makes sense for our collection space. And the technology, most of the technology is metal-based objects, but there are things with rubbering plastics and some glass. And so those are we haven't quite decided exactly what to do with these. This whole collection has been boxed up for 15 years. And we're slowly unboxing things, and the technology bits are the last pieces to be unboxed. But, we have to make choices based on reality. And our reality is we've got one place we can control the climate in.
I would like to know, for example, how is the relation with the board members? I don't know how it works.
We don't have any, fortunately. Whoops. Let me rephrase that.
Well, we're in a kind of a different situation. The Academy was, for its first 200 plus years, a private freestanding institution, and about 7 or 8 years ago, we became part of Drexel University. But we're still kind of in a hybrid situation. We have our own board of directors, and the university has a board of directors, but we have our own institutional advancement department, and Drexel has its own institutional advancement department, but they have to, I think we're a little bit, I don't know, subservient to the university overall. If we wanted to have a fundraising campaign, we don't just go out and do it. We have to go to the university and coordinate with their fundraising priorities. And and as far as the scientific staff at the Academy goes, we have not in recent years had a very close connection with the Academy board members. In the past, it's been better.
Yeah, the comparison of a freestanding museum like the Metropolitan or formerly the Academy with a university museum is kind of hard to make, because universities do have boards, but they are up in the stratosphere, and half the time, well, Julianne likes to joke that the Board of Trustees of Penn State doesn't even know her museum exists, which is good.
I'm not joking.
But it's good. But in a freestanding museum, you are much closer to the board. And I noticed one of their points in here in their path toward change was point number 1 was to make the collections everyone's issues and discuss the collections at the board level, take your board into storage and help them understand that, which I think is in general a good thing, but you also have to be prepared to do a lot of education because your board are not museum professionals. And the whole point in having the board is that they're representatives of your community, and frequently there are people involved in business who could potentially help you raise money. So you need to be prepared to explain to them what you do and why you do it. But I think having the board understand your needs and how you use resources, but you have to be prepared to justify why you have those things in your collections as well. But yeah, the board issue is quite different if you're a museum that is directly under a board, or if you're a museum that's part of a larger institution such as a university.
Yeah, so we don't have a board of directors. The university has a board of trustees, and no, I don't want to be anywhere near them. But I don't want them knowing that we have collections that they could potentially look at as assets they could sell. But we do have a board of advisors, and they're volunteers. It's all volunteer board. They're not paid like a corporate board would be, and it's made up of people from the college, people from the university, people from the town, and a couple of outsiders that are business people that have some relationship to the college. But they really are advisors, and their role is to be our champion. But it has taken years of educating the members of the board, and it changes, not every year, but it changes on a regular basis. But continual education of this is a museum, this is why we're here, this is what we're doing, this is what our mission is, and really getting them involved and making the decisions on mission statements and vision statements and collection management policies and all the core documents that you would need as a museum. We bring the board in on strategic planning, so they have some buy-in. They know what we're doing, and they can go to the dean and say, these folks need more money, or if they're talking to a donor or somebody. But it's they're really supposed to be our advocates, and we hope we've trained them for that. They can also slap us down if they want.
Yeah, you're in an interesting situation, Alana. I'd always wondered what happened to your board when you became part of Drexel, whether they continued to be the board governing the academy, or what role they played. So that's nice to know that you were able to keep the board, but I do wonder what the relationship is between them and Drexel's board.
That all happens at a level
right.
way beyond.
Way beyond my level, yes.
Yeah.
So Brea Tar Pits run, is that a county?
Yeah, we're part of the 3 museums: Natural History Museum of LA County, the Heart Museum up in Newhall. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. And then the Tar Pits. So everything goes through LA County, but it goes Natural History Museum first. If there's any funding or anything, it goes to them first, and then maybe us. But right now, nobody's getting anything.
Right.
Nobody's getting anything anywhere.
Yeah, there was another interesting point in the manifesto that had caught my eye when I read it through this time. I had read this through before, and I met one of the people I know 2 of the people that were behind the organization of this, Trevor and Ely Wood. But on the second page, they talk about the fact that we believe the need to change the conversation from caring for artifacts to caring about people. And so this is one of those debates that has been kicked around in museum studies for years, or are museums about people or museums about the objects? And I think both of those are wrong. That museums are not about the people, and they're not about the objects either one. What museums are about is the object-people interaction, because what museums do that no other institution can do is we put objects and people together so that people can use those objects to understand the world around them. And I think when you start arguing about whether museums are about objects or about people, you lose that point of view. You lose that uniqueness that makes museums what they are. Because anyone can accumulate a lot of objects and anyone can hire a lot of people, but only museums can put the two together in a meaningful way. You know, it's only when we use our collections, when we, you know, do minute research with insects, or when we use big things to bring in the public and educate them. All of those are object-person interactions, and I think that's really what's at the heart of the museum. So I was kind of disappointed to see that question made it to the manifesto. I would like to talk to them about rephrasing that part of it. So I think you can lose the whole point in having your objects. And it's interesting that they did that because they also referred to the book, Neil McGregor's book, A History of the World in 100 Objects, which is a fabulous book. And it is a classic example of how objects are used to understand human history. And you know, the book begins with a hand axe from the Olduvai Gorge and ends with a credit card, as he goes through all these years, you know, 50,000 years of human history looking at objects. But in each case, the object is this physical thing that humans come in and touch and see and work with. And that's what really makes the book work. And so I was kind of disappointed to see that they were able to see that with the book, and then they turn around and bring up is it about objects or people? No, that's all wrong. It's about that interaction. But that's just my view. I'm willing to listen to other dissent.
It's pretty ingrained into me because I've been, and like some of you as well, associated with the Land Grant University. And of course, we've grown up with the mission of being teaching, research, and outreach. So, John, it's automatic to us. It's built into our DNA. We think of nothing other than, you know, the collection, you know, feeds into the teaching, which feeds into the outreach, which feeds back into the research and the collect. I mean, it's not a foreign thing to us at all.
Yeah, theoretically, it's not for us either. But a lot of the education within our college over the last, it's 125 years old as of next year, started off being object-based, and now it's far removed from object-based. So even though the entry-level geology classes in particular use a lot of objects, use a lot of hand specimens, there's not as much research being done with real rocks and ore and cores and things that are in the museum. So we're struggling with, what are we doing with these, you know, because they should be used as educational pieces. And we have a hard time with some people within the college justifying why we're keeping anything.
Yeah. There's also the view from which you look at the museum. And if you look at, for instance, the American Alliance of Museums, they tend to take what I call an outside to the inside view. They kind of see the museum as a building, and they walk through the front doors, and there's all the exhibits and all the educational stuff going on. And that's their view of a museum. And oh yeah, there's collections in the back somewhere. The stuff they hang on the wall, that's interesting. But they do very, very little with collections. Now, historically, they have done a lot, but the last 20, 30 years, their emphasis has all been on the front end of the museum. And then you also find, of course, museums that are purely research that really don't want people in the building, that are their interest is we use public funds to build up these massive collections, which very few people ever get to look at and work with. And I think both of those are errors that we need to be looking for something in between. But I think a lot of that statement about people and objects comes from that point of view. If you look at museum staffing, overwhelmingly in the last 20 or 30 years, the staffing increase has been administrative and front end. And there's been very little increase in staffing in objects. Just a day or two ago, someone posted on the natural history group list a bunch of articles that you can download for free from Bioscience that all had to do with the future of natural history collections. So it's a very interesting series of articles, and they all have to do with new uses for natural history collections and digitization and all of these nice things. One article makes a passing reference to caring for the collection, and that's it. There's no emphasis on who's going to take care of these collections. It's all, how are we going to use them? Well, you can't use them if you don't take care of them, and that means organizing them and getting a storage environment and getting good materials and keeping everything in order. That is always neglected. I have never seen a big digitization grant that included any money for collections care. It gives you money to bring the collections out of storage, digitize them, and then maybe put them back. That's it. No new cabinets, no new materials, no new processing, just digitization. And, you know, that's, where is that money supposed to come from? You know, the idea behind National Science Foundation in the United States was that National Science Foundation would fund cutting edge research, new research to stimulate other research to take place, and the universities would then maintain the labs and the collections and the things that supported the research. But of course, over the years, the university support has eroded away, particularly in land grant institutions. The state contributions and almost across the board are down below 20% of operating expenses for universities. So that support is gone and it hasn't been replaced by anything. So that's what I worry about, is what will happen to these collections in the future, particularly as they get older and larger and need a lot of care. So when I see a endeavor such as the one Laura's working on with the fish collection, where they're going to rearrange the collection storage by container size, which might sound crazy, but it makes a lot of sense in terms of energy use, because the only resources we have are time and money. And if you're going to shorten the search time to find specimens and make the collection more usable, that's a good thing. And so when I see endeavors like that, I'm all for it. I think it's very interesting, but we don't see enough of that going on. We need to be thinking in those terms of how are we going to better take care of these collections, because we're certainly not going to be getting any big increases in funding. And we're not going to be getting any big increases in staff. So we have to find ways to get more done with less, unfortunately. But that's kind of what I worry about. And in that sense, the manifesto is good because it does address the fact that collections should be meeting our mission and we should be using them. But yeah, I agree with Dan that there's not a lot of, and Alana, that there's not a lot of direct relevance between the manifesto to natural history specifically. But there are a lot of points where I think we can find things in common there.
I think too, what may be driving some of that thought that you mentioned, John, about the museum being this place you go into and look at exhibits, and somewhere behind it, there's research material, was really brought home to me a number of years ago when I was at the Naturalist Museum in London, and they had, administrators had sort of made that the edict. And I know when I wanted to visit with one of the staff there, because she had just described a new species that I was interested in, and I said, well, where, I want to talk to Edith. Where's Edith? She's down taking admission tickets now. She's not on the Beetle floor anymore. She's not one of our research staff anymore. And shortly after that, she left, and she and her husband run a pub now.
Yeah, no, they did a lot of redundancies with research staff when they did that. Yeah, that's an interesting point you make. We Julianne and I took a class to London in 2017, looking at museum history, and we looked at two museums right next to each other. One was natural history, and the other was the V&A, the Victoria and Albert. Oh, yeah. And you know, we actually got so bored in natural history that we went back over to the V&A. It was a far more interesting museum, but it was also, those collections were presented in a really intriguing way. And you could see the fact that the staff did research on these collections. It was reflected in the publications in the gift shop. I mean, it was everywhere. It was in the in-depth labels, and natural history seemed to be kind of turning into a theme park. It was very disappointing because, you know, the collections there are wonderful, but you wouldn't know it walking through. And the new dinosaur.
But that wasn't a staff decision either.
No,
that was
no.
Way up the line.
It was administrative.
Yeah.
And their new dinosaur hall is all animatronic dinosaurs. It's big plastic moving machines. It isn't specimens. And I was like, this is not good. But I think museums do have to work hard to bring their research out before the public. It's a thing that sounds great, but it's real hard to do. But if you can get your scientific staff or your curatorial staff involved in explaining what they do with the objects, no matter what kind of museum it is, art museum, natural history, and get that research out there, I think it's a lot more meaningful to the public, and it makes people understand why you need the resources to maintain the collection. And we don't do that enough in general.
So Dan, is there an exhibit component to the Insect Museum in Wisconsin?
Not really. I mean, there are a couple displays in the hallway, and there's a new length of the hallway mural that's being put together by one of my students that happens to be a really good artist. But no, we really don't have much of anything in the way of space or ability to do public displays.
Mhm.
I mean, we do tours, but it's limited and it's into the research area, and we talk about that interface between, you know, research and teaching and outreach when we do that. Or we'll bring some of our oh my stuff down to one of the teaching labs and open it up. We, you know, everybody does these dog and pony shows. Well, we used to when we had summer normal, when we'd have students all over campus, and we'd have people come in and bring things down and do things that way. But when those things were gone, of course, they weren't in the research area.
Yep. But those are all really good ways to get people and objects to interact. I mean, those are
absolutely.
Those are terrific ideas.
Well, that's been one of the benefits of becoming part of Drexel University, is that Drexel in particular is known for its co-op program, where Drexel students take 5 years to complete a degree, and they are on a quarter system, and they do 2 quarters of classes on campus and then 2 quarters of a co-op internship.
Oh.
And it's often, not always paid, but often a paid internship and it started with Drexel having been an engineering focused university, but now, I mean, Drexel has expanded in all kinds of directions, including natural history. They created a new department on campus, which our curators now are faculty in, called BEES, the Biodiversity, Earth and Environmental Sciences. But we get Drexel co-ops, and
that's great.
They have been terrific, and even now with the COVID shutdown, they've continued to do work online, and have been very productive. So we've been getting a lot of help from the interaction with students from the university.
Yeah, that's great.
That's really nice. I wish we had that at Penn State.
Yeah, so some things are normal and people aren't shut out. Our exhibit galleries, we have 2, well, we're gonna have 1 exhibit gallery. It's being remodeled right now. It's on campus, but all of the collections are 5 miles off campus, and it's not on a bus route, nothing. So it's very difficult to get students to come out and work with the collections. And there's a limited number of things they could do with the exhibits. So, you know, we've struggled quite a bit for getting students involved, which is unfortunate.
I don't know if any of you have heard what we have been doing, the citizen science project at the tar pits, where we send microfossil sorting kits out to some schools in LAUSD. The teachers have to come in for a workshop, and then we loan out, depending on their class size, we loan out the microfossil sorting kits. So it's a bag of microfossils, these little magnifying lenses, paintbrushes for them to move everything around, sorting sheets, comment cards and everything. And we loan those out during the spring, and each school is allowed to have them for about a month, and then they send them back. And the first year, the pilot year, the fossil lab volunteers went through it to check for accuracy, and we were going through the comment cards, and these students were just so excited to, you know, be little paleontologists for the month. And I think that's great.
I would have so loved that as a kid.
I would have loved that as a kid.
Yeah. Well, now it's hold. Everything's on hold. But I think it's been a great project. The kids really liked it, and each year we were able to see how to make it better the next year and get it out to more schools.
That's great.
Yeah, very interactive.
They're sorting it down to genus, species, or what are they looking
No,
for?
it's just kind of like separate plant material from bone. We one of the volunteers made a comic. She's now a NASA illustrator. So she made a comic, and it was like the life of the mouse from you know, beginning to the end in the tar pits, and how, yeah. So it was called something about the tar pits death trap. So the kids could read that, and then they have all these different examples, and they look through their little microscopic lens, and yeah, it was plant material, bones, insects, fish bones if they could find it, freshwater shells. Yeah, so
Great.
it's good to get them to kind of differentiate between everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, good program.
And
So we're working on a paper for it now.
Little kids have really good eyes, and they're good.
Yeah, yeah.
Other point that the authors describe here is for example, the tree point is very interesting because it talks about a triage system. So I guess that will be very interesting to see how we can apply maybe a triage system into a policy. So,
particularly for allocating resources, because, ideally we would like to take care of all of the objects in our collections at the same level, but practically we can't do that. And I like their triage idea quite a bit, because that really helps you define the parts of your collection that are more or less valuable. The only proviso I would add to that is that there's, like any other policy, that should be reviewed every 5 or 10 years to make sure that something can get overlooked and triaged to the wrong level when it actually is important. But yeah.
For example, with natural history museums, and the collection is all the time acquiring species, or I don't know how it's in.
It varies. It depends on how active a particular department is, whether they have a curator, collection manager, people who are out in the field. We have some collections that are actively growing, and we have some that have been virtually static for decades.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean of course they're not valuable.
No, not at all.
A few years ago, I was contacted by a guy who was writing a book on what he was interested in was specimens that had been lost in collections. And I think that's what he finally called the book. And I had this big discussion with him. I said, that's really not fair to say lost in the museum, because it is rare that these things are lost. The reason they get used 30 or 40 years later is because you know where they are. They just weren't used yet because we didn't have enough information. And he insisted, no, it has to be. And so I used the example that in 1972 in January, I went into the Cordillera Condor of Ecuador. So we were the first scientific group to ever go in and collect there. And we were there just a few weeks, and I came out with at least I knew at the time 5 new species of frogs. Well, one got published last year, and it's now up to 12 species. And it's not that no one cared, and it's not that the specimens were lost in collections since 1971. It's that it took that long for more material to accumulate so that people could make reasonable decisions about what was a species and what wasn't. And that's science, and science progresses in many cases very slowly. So I really objected to that whole idea of lost in the museum, but I think all of us can point to those instances where we had a specimen in our collection that was in the collection for decades, and then suddenly became useful and valuable.
We've had things that were lost in the museum for probably over a century, and finally it was a question of recognizing them. We had a series of specimens that were illustrated by Edward Charlesworth in 1804 that were Trigonia bivalves from the Jurassic that had preserved soft parts. Mm-hmm. And there was this plate that had been published and circulated, and the Academy acquired the collection that these specimens were in. So we were supposed to have them, but it was probably 100 years that they went, or more, that they went unrecognized, and then we worked through the invertebrate paleontology collection and recognized, oh my goodness, these are the specimens that were figured in the London Geological Journal that everyone's been asking about, and here they are.
Yeah. Well, sometimes, yeah, and sometimes things really are lost in the collection, but and to me, lost implies neglected, and we didn't know where they were, rather than we didn't know what they were.
Well, we didn't know where they were. The collection
Yeah.
had been
Well,
moved.
that is genuinely lost then, but you know, my objection to the book was he was taking anything where a specimen had been collected and not used for years as being lost, and that was my objection. Was no, people actually work really hard to make sure those things aren't lost. They just don't happen to know the significance of them yet, and that to me was the difference. But yeah, that's a great story though. 100 years is,
Well, probably
but
more.
the point is somebody did figure it out.
Yes. Probably in the early 1990s, but we had been getting inquiries about the whereabouts of those specimens for a long time, and probably the collection came to the Academy in the 1840s, and you know, things moved around to different parts of the building, or actually, well, from building to building. The buildings we're currently in, we didn't occupy until the 1860s.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, there was a lot of moving around.
So we're kind of looking at a triage system now because we have limited space, we have lots of collections. Some of them have no provenience, but no obvious provenience. So we're triaging kind of is just now starting kind of mentally, and it'll work into a physical triage. But you know, if we have a specimen that has absolutely no provenience, it's just a rock or it's just whatever, do we keep that or not? Do we go to the effort and the time to try to track down where that came from? Or do we put it aside and become somebody's gravel in their driveway? I don't know. But it is a problem because you can, you know, you do have to prioritize your collections to a degree, but where do you start? But this comes back to deaccessioning too. You can't get rid of anything until you know what you've got. And part of that is looking at everything you've got and all the information with it. And if it's cool stuff, but it's got no scientific value or no scientific information with it, where do you put it within your triage? Is it going out the door, or is it going to be used for exhibit only, or is it, you know, is it valuable enough to sell and help your exhibits out? If you can do that, our collection management policy does not allow us to sell anything. We cannot take money for it. So it's what do we do with 4,000 agates?
Yeah, I was going to say agates and quartz come to mind.
Okay, I guess that is time to start to draw it up. I have two last questions. And the first one is that nowadays, what kind of actions or roles might be taken by a volunteer, intern, and emerging professional to start up those changes announced in the manifesto?
So start out trying to initiate the kinds of change in the manifesto. If you're starting out in life, an intern, I think getting a broad understanding of the collections and how they work, and seeing, you know, trying to get a long-term picture. I know the way I see collections now, because I've been in the business now, well, this is my 51st year working in a museum, if you count my freshman year in college. The way I look at collections now is not the same as when I looked at them when I was 18 and got that first job in the lab. And they're still as exciting and interesting to me as they were when I was 18, but I tend to see them now much more in a historical perspective and see long-term use and see all the changes that happen and how collections, we keep evolving new ways to use them. So I would say try your best to read the literature, try to develop a big picture view of what goes on before you start trying to make decisions about individual things. Anybody else?
I think another good way to at least get an intern or an emerging professional or a student interested is let them start looking through the collections and just finding cool, what they, to their mind, is really cool stuff. And then have them do the research and find out what it is. And, you know, have them, if you can post it somewhere and have them, this is really cool because I like the color of it, but then I found out all this other information. I think that's a good way to kind of get people started thinking more about objects in general, but also that it's not just a pretty thing. You know, it's not just a really cool looking thing with spiky bits coming off of it. It's got all this significance, or it came out of this industry, or it, you know, it's got this historic value, whatever the value is of that object within that collection. If you start looking at all the collection, the huge, gigantic amount of material, I think it's kind of overwhelming. If you can, if you can find something that just really strikes your fancy and go, oh, let's get started there, then it's much more easy to go off on all sorts of tangents into other bits of the collection.
I mentioned early on our museum studies course that's offered through zoology, but it reaches out to the other collections. And I think it's like a 2-credit course, but you can add a 3rd credit to actually do an internship in one of the collections. That's one way we involve. Of course, being at the university, we can actually offer independent study, independent research. And every semester we have probably at least 2 or 3 students doing research projects. Plus, I'm fortunate enough to be able to teach an advanced taxonomy series. And for that one, these are students that are usually junior, seniors, or grad students that already have a fairly good dexterity and ability to understand what collections are. And I have a component of the course that actually is built right into working in the collection. So those are some of the ways that we're able to do it here.
So just to piggyback off of everyone else who's already spoken, research to me is the best way to get involved with it. And I say that only because that's how I got involved. My like connotation of museums has changed since working in a museum, like drastically. And I bring in undergrads every semester, and I have to turn many of them away, unfortunately. But we get so many of them just because we go out and say, hey, we're doing research, and it's marine based, and we go out on a cruise. So everyone just kind of floods in at that. But then we might give them a task. We might say, okay, well, here's a shell, or here's a species. How about you find it in the collections? We'll give you a map. We'll give you the database that allows you to locate it. Do it right. Don't mess up the collections. And that tends to generate a whole lot of interest, because when you get hands-on experience, your curiosity just goes through the roof. So research is definitely a good part of it, and outreach with that research as well.
Outreach on campus, if you're interested in that, you need to talk with Carrie Harris about the natural history collections clubs that she's been organizing or promoting to form on campuses around the country. And she's a real go-getter and an active member of the Spinach Emerging Professionals group. And they've been doing incredible things.
That sounds like a cool program.
I have one question for Laura.
Yeah.
Is that a margarita you've been drinking? Because I am suddenly really thirsty. A little salt on the rim, I'm thinking.
Yeah, I saw that glass.
It's a homemade lemonade.
Yeah.
Did you spill a little tequila in it?
Yeah. Works for me.
Do you have the link? If you can share in the chat about the program that you say.
I don't have it handy, but if you go on the Spinach website, spnhc.org, I'm sure you can find information either through the Emerging Professionals group. The name of the woman who's been spearheading it is Carrie Harris, K-A-R-I, that I can put in that.
Okay, and I guess that my last question is, what would you like to say to the emerging professionals? Any advice to the new and old generations, and maybe that have been working in the field, and what things you have seen and you don't like it about the old and the new people who is working in collections, and that things that don't like to see in the people who has been in the field. So yeah. Anyone?
I tell new people, have fun.
Yes.
That museums are the best place in the world to work, and take advantage of it. Learn all you can, learn all the different things you can do, because it opens up all kinds of unexpected opportunities to do really, really interesting things. Your friends might make more money than you do, but you'll have a lot more fun.
I just say ask questions. Ask questions to anybody
Yeah.
that will answer you.
Yeah.
Anybody.
Explore within the collection.
Yeah.
And I started off life of my in the museum as a fossil preparator, a vertebrate fossil preparator. And I would say if you're going to be a paleontologist, do field work in the lab first. Do not go out to the field without and jack that stuff up and bring things.
Yeah, you learn so much more in the lab. Actually, having those fossils in your hand, you get to clean it and you just learn so much more.
Yes. Yeah, and you understand better
Yeah.
field work than you ever will by just walking out into the field.
Yeah.
For example, I got interested in this master because in my undergrad internship, my undergrad internship was in a museum of architecture in Colombia. And this is the way how I got involucrated with collections. But at the beginning of my master's, I was like I didn't like museums at all. So I was like, I'm on the wrong master's because I told to my teachers, like, I don't like museums and I'm doing my master's in museum. Isn't like paradoxically, like kind of ironic that I'm doing this, but I don't like it. So she's not, you are completely fine because you can be a game changer in the field and it's good. For example, I like collections because I used to work with just two people, the director, the secretary, a professional in graphic design, and me. It was like, okay, so it was super overwhelming, but at the same time, I wanted to learn more about this. And yeah, so I'm on here. So yeah, and yeah, I appreciate that you are here. Thank you so much for support me with this new initiative. And I would like to hear some suggestions or advice to continue building up this space for us. So I might send a pool for maybe for arrange a better schedule, or the idea is to do this maybe monthly. And in the chat, I shared the link of my club that because I was with a blog, but I decided to join the We Are Museums community. So, and will be better because we will have a specific circle for us. And yeah, so I might send the next meetup for this circle by We Are Museums. And yeah, and if you have some suggestions for the next meetup about the reading, you can send me an email. All the information is in my in this circle that I'm still working on, but I will submit all my personal information. And the next article will be a Clean House to Survive. Museums confront their crowded basement. And this is an article written by Robin Pogrebin in 2019. So yeah, thank you so much for participating, and I hope that you continue participating and enjoying this.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, and
Thank you.
good seeing all of you.
Yeah.
Rainey,
It's nice to meet everybody.
Margarita time.
Yeah.
see you next time.
Yeah. Put some tequila in that.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Bye.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.